The thunder rolled across the plains like a warning as Theodora Lawson ran for her life, her dark hair whipping behind her in the storm. The year was 1878, and in the small frontier town of Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, a woman alone might as well be wearing a target on her back. Especially a woman they called Cursed. Rain lashed her face as she stumbled through the mud, the lanterns of the mob flickering in the distance behind her. Their shouts carried on the wind accusations that cut deeper than any knife. Witch, harbinger of death, cursed woman. Theodora had arrived in Willow Creek just 3 months prior, seeking a fresh start after the tragedy that had befallen her family back east. But misfortune seemed to follow her like a shadow. First, the drought that had plagued the town for months broke with torrential rains the day after her arrival. Then cattle began dying mysteriously on the surrounding ranches, and when little Timothy Collins took ill with fever, the whispers started in earnest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the road ahead. In the distance, Theodora could make out the silhouette of a small cabin. With the last of her strength, she pushed forward, praying whoever lived there would offer shelter, if only for the night. Owen Grayson sat at his rough-hewn table, nursing a glass of whiskey as the storm raged outside. At 32, he'd seen his fair share of hardship. The war had taken his youth, and the years since had taken most of his faith in humanity. Now he worked his modest ranch alone, keeping to himself and staying out of town affairs whenever possible. The pounding at his door startled him from his thoughts. Cautiously, he reached for the rifle propped against the wall before approaching. "Who's there?" He called out, voice gruff from disuse. "Please," came a desperate female voice, nearly drowned by the thunder. "They're coming. Help me." Owen hesitated only a moment before unbolting the door. It swung open to reveal a woman drenched to the bone, her simple blue dress clinging to her frame, dark eyes wide with terror. "Get in," he said, quickly scanning the darkness behind her before pulling her inside and securing the door once more. Theodora stood dripping on his floor, shivering violently. Up close, Owen could see she was young, perhaps mid-20s, with striking features beneath the mud and rainwater. "Thank you," she breathed, wrapping her arms around herself. "I didn't know where else to go." "You're the new schoolteacher," Owen stated, recognition dawning. He'd seen her in town on his infrequent supply runs but had never spoken to her. "I was," she replied bitterly. "Now I'm the witch they're hunting." Before Owen could respond, voices and the glow of lanterns appeared in the distance. He moved swiftly to extinguish his own lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. "They can't find me here," Theodora whispered, panic rising in her voice. "They'll burn your home too." Owen's jaw tightened as he peered through a crack in the shutters. "Nobody's burning anything tonight." He turned to her, expression unreadable in the darkness. "There's a cellar door beneath the rug. Get down there and stay quiet." Theodora didn't hesitate, finding the trapdoor and descending into the musty space below. Owen replaced the rug just as the first shouts reached his porch. The pounding on his door was aggressive this time. Owen took a deep breath, set his rifle aside, visible but not in hand, and opened the door to find Sheriff Harris and a dozen men from town, all looking grim and determined. "Evening, Sheriff," Owen said calmly. "What brings you all the way out here in such weather?" Sheriff Harris, a stocky man with a graying mustache, stepped forward. "We're looking for the Lawson woman. She ran this direction." "Haven't seen anyone," Owen replied, leaning against the doorframe with practiced casualness. "Been inside since sundown. Mind if we look around?" Asked Martin Decker, the town's banker whose cattle had been among the first to die mysteriously. "Actually, I do mind," Owen said, straightening to his full height. "It's late, I'm tired, and I don't appreciate a mob showing up at my door." "If you have legitimate business, Sheriff, come back in the morning. Alone." The sheriff hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Owen Grayson wasn't a man to trifle with. Everyone in the county knew that. He'd fought for the Union, returned with scars both visible and hidden, and kept to himself. But he was fair in his dealings and paid his taxes on time. "Grayson," the sheriff said quietly, "that woman is trouble. 3 children sick now, and old man Winters dropped dead right after she read to him at the general store." Sounds like you've got a fever going around and an old man who lived past his time, Owen replied evenly. Not witchcraft. She brings the curse wherever she goes, hissed Decker. Her entire family died of mysterious illness back east, town they're burned to the ground not long after. Owen's expression didn't change. If you believe in curses, that's your business. Now, unless you've got a warrant, I suggest you all head back to town before this storm gets worse. For a tense moment, no one moved, then Sheriff Harris sighed and stepped back. We'll be watching the roads, he warned. If you see her, send word immediately. Owen nodded once, then closed the door firmly. He waited by the window until the lanterns disappeared into the stormy night before pulling back the rug to release his unexpected guest. Theodora climbed out, still trembling but with a spark of defiance in her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly, though you've probably just cursed yourself by association. Owen snorted. I don't believe in curses, Miss Lawson. Please call me Theodora. She hugged herself, still soaked and shivering. And you should believe in them. Everyone who helps me seems to suffer for it. Owen moved to stoke the fire, then disappeared into the small bedroom, returning with a flannel shirt and trousers. These will be too big, but they're dry. You can change behind that screen. I'll make coffee. Theodora accepted the clothes gratefully and moved behind the screen in the corner. As she changed, she spoke softly. It's happened everywhere I've gone since the fever took my family 3 years ago. I thought moving west, starting fresh. But it's always the same. Owen busied himself with the coffee pot, giving her privacy. People look for simple explanations when bad things happen. A stranger makes an easy target. It's more than that, she insisted, emerging in his oversized clothing, her wet dress draped over her arm. The drought broke into floods when I arrived. The cattle began dying the week after. The children fell ill after I taught them a new song. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes I wonder if they're right about me. Owen hung her dress near the fire to dry, then poured 2 cups of strong black coffee, handing one to her. My wife and son died of cholera 7 years ago, he said matter-of-factly. Neighbors whispered that it was punishment for something I'd done in the war. People talk nonsense when they're afraid. Theodora's eyes widened with sympathy. I'm so sorry, he shrugged. Point is, bad things happen, blaming you won't stop them. He gestured to a chair. Sit, drink your coffee, you can take the bed tonight, I'll sleep out here. I can't stay, she protested. They'll come back, and next time I'll still send them away, Owen interrupted firmly. Unless you've got somewhere better to go tonight, Theodora sank into the chair, cradling the warm cup between her hands. No, she admitted softly, I don't. Then it's settled. Owen sat across from her. Tomorrow we'll figure out your next steps. For tonight, rest. As the storm continued to rage outside, they sat in companionable silence, 2 lonely souls finding unexpected sanctuary in each other's company. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's tempest had been a dream. Theodora woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she forgot her predicament, seduced by the simple comforts. Owen stood at the stove, his back to her as she emerged from the bedroom. He'd given her his bed despite her protests, insisting he was used to sleeping rough. Looking at him now in the morning light, Theodora noted the strength in his broad shoulders, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he'd once smiled more often than he did now. Good morning, she said softly. He turned, nodding. Sleep well, better than I expected to, she admitted. Thank you again for your kindness. Owen merely shrugged, sliding eggs and bacon onto 2 plates. They ate in silence for a few minutes before he spoke. I've been thinking about your situation. You can't go back to town not with how things stand. Theodora set down her fork. I know I need to move on, find someplace new where they haven't heard of me yet. She sighed deeply. Though I'm beginning to wonder if such a place exists. Running isn't the answer, Owen said firmly. It only confirms their suspicions. What alternative do I have? Stay and be lynched, Owen leaned forward. Stay and prove them wrong. Stay under my protection until we can change their minds. Theodora stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? You don't know me, and from what I've seen, you value your solitude. I know what it's like to be judged unfairly, he replied simply. Besides, I could use help around the place. Consider it and even exchange your labor for my protection. Theodora considered his offer. Staying meant risk, not just to herself but to this man who'd already shown her more kindness than anyone had in years. And yet the thought of running again, of starting over in yet another town with the shadow of suspicion always at her heels, was exhausting. If I stay, she said slowly, people will talk. They'll say worse things about you than they already do about me. A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. Let them. I've never much cared for town gossip. And if misfortune continues to follow me, if your crops fail or your cattle die, will you still be so certain I'm not cursed? Owen met her gaze steadily. I'll take my chances. Later that day, Owen rode into town alone, leaving Theodora to rest at the cabin. He needed supplies and, more importantly, information. The general store was buzzing with talk of the previous night's events when he entered. Well, look what the cat dragged in, said Elmer White, the storekeeper, as Owen placed his list on the counter. Thought you weren't due for supplies till next week. Plans change, Owen replied neutrally, aware of the eyes watching him. Heard you turned away the sheriff last night, ventured Clara White, Elmer's wife, as she began gathering his items. During that witch hunt for the schoolteacher. Owen kept his expression impassive. Wasn't aware we were in the business of hunting women in the middle of the night. That woman's brought nothing but trouble, said Jasper Reed, a local farmer who was nursing a cup of coffee by the stove. My best milk cow dropped dead 2 days after she walked past my property. And my youngest has been running a fever since she taught him last week, added Margaret Powell, clutching her shawl tighter. Owen took his time before responding. Seems to me this town's looking for someone to blame for ordinary troubles. Cows die, children get sick, crops fail. Been happening since the beginning of time. Not like this, insisted Jasper, and there's her history to consider. Every place she's lived, disaster follows. That's so, Owen asked, deliberately casual. You verified this personally, have you? The farmer shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, but Sheriff Harris received telegrams, hearsay. Owen cut him off. Nothing but rumors and fear. Clara White paused in her gathering of supplies. They say her entire family died of a mysterious illness that the doctors couldn't explain. And not 2 weeks after they were buried, their hometown in Pennsylvania had a fire that destroyed half the buildings. And who told you that? Owen challenged. Did Miss Lawson share these details, or are you repeating stories? The silence that followed was answer enough. I'd be careful spreading tales about a woman who's done nothing wrong, Owen continued, his voice hardening slightly. This town's better than that, or at least it used to be. Elmer White cleared his throat uncomfortably. No one's saying she caused these things on purpose, Grayson. But some folks just seem to carry misfortune with them, like a cloud. And some folks are too quick to point fingers instead of helping their neighbors, Owen countered, placing money on the counter for his supplies. Add a bolt of calico and some sewing supplies to my order. This addition raised eyebrows throughout the store. Owen Grayson had been a widower for 7 years and was not known to sew. Something you want to tell us, Grayson? Asked Elmer cautiously. Owen met his gaze steadily. Not particularly. As he loaded his purchases onto his horse, Sheriff Harris approached, looking troubled. Word is you're harboring the Lawson woman, he said without preamble. Owen secured the last package. Is there a law against offering shelter to someone in need, Sheriff? No law, Harris admitted. But it's not wise, son. That woman is innocent of any crime, Owen finished firmly, and deserves the same protection under the law as anyone else in this territory. The sheriff sighed heavily. I can't guarantee that protection if people get riled up enough. You know how frontier justice works. Owen turned to face him fully. I do, which is why I'm telling you now, anyone who comes to my land looking to harm Miss Lawson will be met with force. His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. I fought in the war, Sheriff. I don't want trouble, but I won't shy from it either. Harris studied him for a long moment. You always were stubborn as a mule, Grayson. Just be careful. Whatever's following that woman, curse, bad luck, or coincidence, it doesn't discriminate. Owen mounted his horse. Then curse me too for caring, he said simply, before turning and riding out of town, leaving a stunned sheriff in his wake. When he returned to the cabin, Owen found Theodora had been busy in his absence. The floors were swept, dishes washed, and a pot of stew simmered on the stove. She'd found his late wife's apron and had tied it over his two large clothes, her hair pulled back with a strip of fabric. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing around the tidied space. "I needed to keep busy." "Not at all," he replied, setting down his packages. "Smells good." "It's the least I could do," she approached hesitantly. "How was town?" "About what you'd expect." He didn't elaborate, instead handing her the package of calico and sewing supplies. "Thought you might want to make something that fits better than my old things." Theodora accepted the package with wide eyes, running her fingers over the fabric, a simple blue pattern, not fancy but practical and pretty enough. "This is very thoughtful, thank you." "There's something else we need to discuss," Owen said, his tone growing serious. "I made it clear in town that you're under my protection. That means they know you're here." Alarm flashed across her face. "Will they come for me?" "Not immediately," he assured her. "But we need to be prepared. I want to teach you to shoot." "A gun?" she asked, taken aback. "For your protection," he nodded. "I can't always be here, and you need to be able to defend yourself." Theodora seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'm willing to learn." Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. During the mornings, Owen would teach Theodora to handle his spare revolver, patiently showing her how to load, aim, and fire. She was a quick study, her initial fear giving way to determination. By the third day, she could hit a can placed on a fence post with reasonable accuracy. "My father would be scandalized," she laughed after a particularly good shot, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet landscape. "He believed women should never handle firearms." "Your father never lived on the frontier," Owen replied, finding himself smiling at her obvious pride. In the afternoons, while Owen tended to ranch chores, Theodora transformed the bachelor's cabin. She turned flour sacks into curtains, scrubbed surfaces that hadn't been properly cleaned in years, and used her new sewing supplies to mend his worn clothes. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing their histories to each other. "I was engaged once," Theodora told him over supper on the fourth night, "before my family fell ill. His name was William." Owen noted the past tense. "What happened?" "When my parents and sisters became sick, I nursed them. When they died one by one, the town became suspicious. William's family forbade him from seeing me." Her eyes grew distant. "He didn't fight very hard against their wishes." "His loss," Owen said simply. A small smile touched her lips. "After that, I took a teaching position in another town. I lasted 6 months before the rumors started there too. A student's broken arm, a hailstorm that damaged crops somehow, they became my fault." She sighed. "I've been moving westward ever since, never staying more than a few months anywhere." "That stops now," Owen said with quiet certainty. "You've run far enough." As days turned into weeks, something shifted between them. It began with small moments, hands touching as they passed dishes, lingering glances across the room, comfortable silences that neither felt compelled to break. Theodora blossomed under the simple acceptance Owen offered, her smiles coming more frequently, her laughter less guarded. For Owen, her presence awakened parts of himself he'd thought long dead. The cabin, once merely shelter, began to feel like a home again. He found himself hurrying through chores to return to her company, taking pleasure in bringing her wildflowers he'd spotted while checking fence lines, or sharing stories he hadn't told anyone in years. One evening, as summer's heat began to give way to autumn's promise, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I never thanked you properly," Theodora said softly. "Not just for taking me in that night, but for believing in me when no one else would." Owen glanced at her profile, gilded in the fading light. "Nothing to thank me for. I just treated you like a person deserves to be treated." "It's more than that." She turned to face him fully. You gave me something I'd lost hope of finding again, a place where I don't have to run, where I'm not feared or hated." Their eyes held, and Owen felt something tighten in his chest. Before he could respond, the distant sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Both tensed immediately. Owen stood, reaching for the rifle that was never far from hand these days. "Get inside," he said quietly. Theodora rose but didn't move toward the door. "No, whatever's coming, we face it together." Owen wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her stance. With a short nod, he positioned himself slightly in front of her as 3 riders came into view. Relief washed through him as he recognized Sheriff Harris, Doc Peterson, and to his surprise, Margaret Powell, the woman whose child had been sick. "Evening, Sheriff," Owen called as they approached. Though he didn't lower his rifle, the 3 dismounted, and Owen noted that while they looked serious, they didn't appear hostile. "Grayson," the sheriff nodded. "Miss Lawson, we've come to talk if you're willing." Owen glanced at Theodora, who gave a small nod. "All right," he agreed cautiously, "but the weapons stay outside." Once the sheriff had placed his gun on the porch rail and they'd all settled inside with coffee, Doc Peterson cleared his throat. "Miss Lawson, I owe you an apology," the elderly physician began. "I've examined all the children who fell ill, including young Timothy Collins, who started the rumors. They all had the same strain of influenza, nothing mysterious or cursed about it." Theodora's hands trembled slightly around her cup. "And the cattle deaths, contaminated water source," the sheriff explained. "Found it yesterday. A dead deer had fallen into the creek that feeds most of the north pastures, nothing to do with any curse." Margaret Powell spoke up next, her voice quavering. "My Jeremy is better now, Miss Lawson, and I feel terrible for what we all thought, what we said about you." Theodora sat very still, absorbing their words. "Why the change of heart?" she finally asked. "People have accused me before, and evidence to the contrary rarely swayed them." The 3 visitors exchanged glances before Doc Peterson answered. "Partly because I insisted on investigating properly instead of jumping to superstition," he said. "But mostly because we received a letter from your former town in Pennsylvania." He removed an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Theodora. She opened it with shaking fingers, reading silently before looking up with tears in her eyes. "The Reverend there wrote to clear my name," she explained to Owen. "He says the illness that took my family was later identified as typhoid from a contaminated well, and the fire, it started in the blacksmith shop, nowhere near where I'd lived." "The town feels mighty ashamed, Miss Lawson," Sheriff Harris said gruffly. "Folks would like to make amends if you'd consider coming back. The school board asked me specifically to offer you your teaching position again." Owen watched Theodora carefully, a sudden tightness in his chest at the thought of her returning to town, leaving the life they'd begun building together. But he remained silent, knowing this was her decision to make. Theodora looked around the cabin at the curtains she'd sewn, the books they'd read together in the evenings, the space that had become her sanctuary before meeting Owen's gaze. "Thank you for the offer, Sheriff," she said without looking away from Owen, "but I've found where I belong." After the visitors departed, promising to spread the truth about Theodora throughout the town, a new tension filled the cabin, not unpleasant, but charged with unspoken feelings. "You don't have to stay because of me," Owen said finally, standing by the fireplace. "If you want to return to teaching, I wouldn't hold you here." Theodora moved to stand before him, closer than she'd ever allowed herself before. "Is that what you think, that I'm staying out of obligation? You're free now," he said quietly. "Your name is cleared. You could go anywhere, do anything. And if what I want is here," she challenged, her eyes searching his face. "If who I want is here," Owen's breath caught. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. "Then I'd say we've both been under a spell these past weeks, and I have no desire to break it." Theodora smiled, leaning into his touch. "Then curse me too," she whispered, "for caring more than I ever thought possible." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and answer both. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he admitted. "After Mary died, I thought that part of my life was over. "And I never thought anyone would stand beside me when the whole world seemed against me," she replied. "You changed everything, Owen Grayson." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Owen and Theodora's relationship deepened. They began making plans, speaking of future seasons as certainties they would face together. The town's attitude shifted dramatically once the truth about Theodora's past was known. Invitations came to attend church services, community gatherings, even a harvest festival in October. Theodora approached these opportunities cautiously at first, wary after years of rejection. But with Owen steadfast beside her, she gradually reconnected with the community. She even agreed to tutor children who lived too far from town to attend school regularly, finding joy again in teaching without fear of accusation. By November, when the first dusting of snow covered the ground, Owen took Theodora to a ridge overlooking his property, the land stretching out before them. "I want to build something here," he told her, pointing to a flat area near a stand of cottonwood trees. "A proper house with more rooms than my cabin." Theodora gazed at the spot, understanding the unspoken question. "How many more rooms did you have in mind?" "At least 3, he replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "One for us and perhaps—" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Perhaps a nursery," she finished for him, her cheeks flushing. Owen turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Theodora Lawson, I've lived half a life these past 7 years. Since you arrived, I've been whole again. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. When she found her voice, it was strong and certain. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks before Christmas in the small church in Willow Creek, the same town that had once hunted Theodora, now celebrating their union. Sheriff Harris stood as Owen's best man, while Clara White, who had become a dear friend, stood for Theodora. The winter passed in a blur of happiness as they began work on their new home, Owen insisting on building much of it himself with help from neighbors. Theodora continued her tutoring, her students growing fond of the kind teacher who told wonderful stories and never spoke down to them. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. As the frame of their house rose against the backdrop of greening fields, Theodora shared news that brought Owen to his knees, gathering her in his arms with tears in his eyes. "A baby," he whispered in wonder, placing a gentle hand over her still flat stomach. "Our child. Due in early autumn," she confirmed, her face radiant. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he assured her, kissing her deeply. As Theodora's body changed with the growing life inside her, the new house was completed a spacious home with large windows to catch the sunlight, a wide porch for summer evenings. And yes, a nursery painted in soft yellows and blues. They moved in just as summer reached its height, the wildflowers blooming across the prairie as if in celebration. The town that had once feared Theodora now embraced her fully. The ladies organized a baby shower, bringing gifts and wisdom for the expectant mother. Even old Martin Decker, who had been among the loudest accusers during the curse incident, presented them with a handcrafted cradle, his way of making amends. In late September, as the leaves began to turn, Theodora went into labor. Owen paced outside their bedroom while Doc Peterson and Clara White attended to her. The hours stretched on, each cry from beyond the door testing his resolve to remain calm. Finally, as dawn broke over the eastern hills, the cry of a newborn pierced the quiet house. Moments later, Clara opened the door, her face tired but beaming. "You have a daughter, Owen," she announced. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." Inside, he found Theodora propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle. She looked up as he entered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Come meet your daughter," she whispered. Owen approached with reverence, carefully sitting beside them on the bed. When Theodora placed the infant in his arms, the tiny face scrunched in protest before settling against his chest. "She's perfect," he breathed, counting tiny fingers and marveling at the wisp of dark hair that promised to be like her mother's. "What shall we name her?" Theodora asked softly. Owen considered for a moment. "Hope," he suggested. Because that's what she represents, everything we hoped for when we thought hope was lost. Hope Grayson, Theodora tested the name. It's beautiful. As autumn deepened into winter, their first Christmas as a family approached. The house was warm and festive. A pine tree cut from their land standing in the corner, decorated with popcorn strings, paper ornaments, and small candles. On Christmas Eve, with baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Owen and Theodora sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "I was thinking about the night we met," she said quietly. "How terrified I was, how certain that destruction followed me everywhere." "And now," he prompted, pressing a kiss to her temple, "now I know that what followed me wasn't a curse, but the courage to keep going despite what others believed." She turned in his arms to face him. "You saw that courage when I couldn't see it myself." "I saw you," he said simply. "Not the rumors or the fears, just you." Theodora touched his face gently. "Do you know what you said that night to the sheriff? I heard you through the floorboards." Owen smiled, remembering. "I said, then curse me too for caring." "You had no idea how those words would change everything," she murmured. "How they would give me something to hold on to when I'd lost all hope." "I meant them," he replied. "I would have faced anything to keep you safe." "I know." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "That's why I fell in love with you, because you were brave enough to stand against the entire town for a woman you barely knew." "Best decision I ever made," Owen assured her, gathering her closer. From the cradle came a small sound, not quite a cry, but a stirring. Theodora moved to check on their daughter, lifting her gently. "I think someone wants to join the celebration," she said, bringing Hope back to the fireside. As the three of them sat together in the warm glow, Owen reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a stormy night and desperate pounding on his door to this moment of perfect contentment, their path had been unexpected but ultimately blessed. "Merry Christmas," he whispered to his family, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together, no longer cursed, but blessed beyond measure. 5 years later, the Grayson Ranch had flourished into one of the most prosperous in the county. The original cabin now served as a bunkhouse for the 2 hired hands who helped Owen with the expanded herd of cattle, while the main house had grown to include a second story with additional bedrooms. Hope, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's dark hair and her father's determined chin, raced around the yard chasing her 3-year-old brother, Samuel. Behind them, Theodora stood on the porch, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their 3rd child grew. "Children, be careful," she called as Hope climbed onto the corral fence. "Your father will be home soon, and dinner is almost ready." As if summoned by her words, Owen appeared on the ridge, riding alongside a wagon driven by Sheriff Harris. Theodora shaded her eyes, surprised by the unexpected visitor. "Mama, Papa's home," Hope cried, abandoning her fence perch to run toward the approaching riders, Samuel toddling after her as fast as his little legs would carry him. Owen dismounted in one fluid motion, scooping up both children in a bear hug that produced squeals of delight before setting them down and approaching his wife. "This is a nice surprise," Theodora said, accepting his kiss before nodding to the sheriff. "Good afternoon, Sheriff Harris." "Will you join us for supper?" "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Grayson, but I can't stay," the older man replied, tipping his hat. "Just escorting your husband and his delivery back from town." Theodora raised an eyebrow at Owen. "Delivery?" A mysterious smile played at Owen's lips. "Children, why don't you show Sheriff Harris your new pony before he heads back to town?" As the children eagerly dragged the amused sheriff toward the small corral where a gentle Shetland pony grazed, Owen took Theodora's hands in his. "I have something for you," he said. "A surprise I've been planning for months." He led her to the wagon and pulled back the canvas covering, revealing a gleaming, upright piano. Theodora gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Owen, how did you—" "It came all the way from St. Louis," he explained, pride evident in his voice. "I remember you saying how you missed playing, how your family had a piano back east." Tears filled her eyes as she reached out to touch the polished wood. "It's beautiful, but it must have cost worth every penny," he interrupted gently. "The ranch had a good year." Besides, I want our children to grow up with music the way you did." Theodora threw her arms around his neck, mindful of her pregnant belly between them. "I love you, Owen Grayson," she whispered fiercely, "more every day." "And I love you," he replied, holding her close, "my not-so-cursed wife." That evening, after the piano had been carefully moved into the parlor and the children put to bed with extra stories to calm their excitement, Theodora sat at the instrument, her fingers remembering skills long dormant. The melody that filled the house was sweet and gentle, a lullaby her own mother had played for her as a child. Owen sat nearby, watching her with the same wonder he'd felt the first time he realized he loved her. The years had only deepened their connection, each challenge faced together strengthening the bond between them. When she finished playing, Theodora joined him on the sofa, nestling against his side with a contented sigh. "You ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" she asked. "If there hadn't been a storm that night, if you hadn't opened your door to a stranger?" "Sometimes," Owen admitted, his hand drifting to rest on her rounded belly. "But then I remember something my father used to say, that the Lord works in mysterious ways." "Converting to philosophy in your old age," she teased. Poking his ribs gently, he chuckled, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Just counting my blessings." And they started the moment a desperate schoolteacher came pounding on my door in the middle of a thunderstorm. Theodora's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, in all these years, we've never once experienced anything that could be called a curse. No mysterious illnesses, no unexplained disasters, just ordinary challenges and joys." "That's because there never was a curse," Owen said firmly. "Just fear and ignorance looking for a target." He pulled her closer. "And if there had been, I meant what I said that night, I would have gladly taken it on to have you in my life." "My protector," she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "My hero, my heart," he replied simply. Outside, the stars shone brightly over the peaceful ranch. The same stars that had witnessed their beginning on a stormy night when a desperate woman ran for her life and found not just shelter, but a future brighter than she could have imagined. In Willow Creek, the story of Owen and Theodora Grayson had become something of a legend, how a cursed woman and a solitary rancher had found love against all odds, how their union had brought prosperity instead of disaster. Some of the older folks still crossed themselves when telling the tale, but the younger generation spoke of it as a romance to aspire to a love strong enough to defy superstition and brave enough to stand against the crowd. And on their ranch, far from the whispers and tales, Owen and Theodora continued to build their life together, each day a testament to the power of believing in someone when the rest of the world had turned away. Each morning, Owen would kiss his wife and whisper the words that had changed both their lives. "Curse me still for caring, my love, for I wouldn't have it any other way." And Theodora, surrounded by the family she'd once thought impossible, knew that what others had called a curse had been, in truth, the greatest blessing of all.